The morning I was to marry a woman I did not love, my wolf chose that exact hour to fall in love with someone else. He had been silent for 11 years. Not sulking, silent. Since my father died and the crown of Havelock came down on my head like a dropped stone, my wolf had gone quiet the way a house goes quiet when the person who laughed in it has left. I ran the hold. I mended the roads and settled the grain disputes and stood at too many gravesides. He watched from somewhere far back behind my ribs and said nothing, and I stopped expecting him to. A king does not need a wolf who talks. A king needs a wolf who obeys, and mine did that much. So when a voice I had almost forgotten went off inside my skull like a struck bell, there. That one. That one right there, Emeric, do you see her? I nearly walked into a pillar in my own great hall. I did not see her. I saw banners. Marsh's End had sent their colors to hang beside ours. Gray pine and green reed twined together to show the two packs made one, and a girl on a ladder was pinning the last of them so the seam wouldn't show. That was all. A seamstress in a plain brown dress with a pincushion strapped to her wrist and a smudge of chalk on her jaw, reaching up to smooth a fold of cloth. Nothing about her belonged in the thought my wolf had just flung at me, with the force of a man throwing open a door he'd been leaning on for a decade. Her hands, my wolf said, reverent as a monk. Look at her hands. I am getting married in an hour, I said, under my breath. To no one, as far as anyone watching could tell. I know, he said, I'm as surprised as you are. Terrible timing. Look at her hands anyway. I did not look at her hands. I told myself I did not. But a man tells himself many things in the moment before he learns which of them are true, and the truth is that I looked. She had wound a length of gray thread twice around one finger to keep her tension even, and she drew each stitch through the heavy banner cloth with a small, sure pull. And there was nothing remarkable about it in all the world except that my whole chest had gone still to watch, the way the surface of the lake goes still just before dawn, when the wind that has troubled it all night finally lies down. I turned on my heel and went to be dressed for my wedding, and behind me my wolf made a sound I had not heard him make since I was a boy, a low, delighted, disbelieving huff, the sound of someone who has found a coin in an old coat. Let me be plain about the match, because it matters, and because I was not a villain in it and neither was she. Havelock and Marsh's End had bled each other over a strip of lakeshore for 2 generations. Cattle taken, wells poisoned, young men come home on shields. My father's father started it over something no one living could name any more. A stolen horse, a burnt fence, an insult at a market long since forgotten, and my father died with it unfinished, coughing his last in the war tent while the snow came down, and I inherited a quarrel I had never wanted against people I had never met. I was 19 when the crown came to me. I am 30 now. I have spent my whole ruling life at the accounting book of that war, so many head of cattle owed, so many widows to pension, so many boys of Havelock in the ground before their beards came in. I stopped dreaming somewhere in there. A man who wakes every morning to a ledger of the dead does not have much room left for wanting things. I did not notice the room closing. That is the thing about a wall, you do not feel the last stone go in. One day you simply look up and find you are inside it, and you have been for years, and you cannot remember the door. So when old Alder of Marsh's End sent word that he was tired too, that his daughter Sabine was of age and unpromised, and that a marriage might close the wound a treaty never could, I said yes before the messenger finished speaking. I would have married a fence post to stop the funerals. Sabine was not a fence post. She was a tall, clear-eyed woman with a warrior's straight back and a diplomat's careful mouth, and when we had met once, formally, over a table of maps in a neutral hall on the border, she had looked at me with the exact weary practicality I felt in my own chest, and I had thought, good. She understands. Neither of us is pretending this is a song. That was the marriage. 2 tired holds and 2 tired people doing the sensible thing so that other people's sons could grow old. I had made my peace with it. I had made such a thorough peace with it that I had almost convinced myself I felt nothing at all, which is a different thing from feeling nothing, though it takes a wiser man than I was that morning to know the difference. And now my wolf, silent 11 years, was awake and singing over a seamstress on a ladder. We could just not get married, he offered, while my valet buttoned me into gray, the deep slate gray of Havelock, the color of the lake under cloud, cut close and severe, because I had told the tailor plainly that I was ending a war, not attending a festival. We are ending a war. Wars end other ways. Name one. He could not name one. He grumbled and went quiet, but it was not the old silence. It was the quiet of a man biding his time, and I knew, buttoning my collar, that this was going to be the longest wedding of my life. I had no idea. I truly had no idea. Because across the hall, though I would not learn it for 2 days, the seamstress on the ladder had gone very still when my wolf spoke, because she had heard him too. Her name was Tamsin, and she was not supposed to be at my wedding at all. She traveled the lake road with a needle and a good eye, mending what people brought her, sleeping in barns and the backs of kind kitchens. She had no house, no pack, no name that opened a door. Her mother had died when she was small, and her father had followed the year after, and her grandmother had raised her on the road in a mender's cart until the old woman too went into the ground. And after that it was only Tamsin and the needle and the lake road that ran its long gray ribbon from hold to hold, mending as she went. Marsh's End had hired her to finish the banners when their own seamstress took ill with the autumn fever, and she had walked 3 days to earn the coin, and she had climbed my ladder to hide a crooked seam, and she had heard a voice that was not a voice say there, that one, and she had looked down, expecting to find a person speaking, and found instead the Alpha King of Havelock staring at the banners with the face of a man who has heard a ghost. She had known then what I did not know for 2 more days, that the king's wolf was speaking, and that no one else in the hall so much as flinched, and that she, Tamsin, the seamstress, nobody's daughter, 3 days' walk from a warm meal, was the only living soul in that room who could hear it. Her grandmother had warned her. She had warned her many times over many years, in the cart on the long roads, with the old woman's needle going in the lamplight and the horse's slow tread beneath them. Wolf tongue, the old woman called it, the way you'd name a birthmark. It ran thin in their blood, 1 woman in a generation if that, the great-grandmother had it, and then no one, and then Tamsin, the ear that catches what a bonded wolf says under the words its man speaks aloud. It is not a gift, child, her grandmother had told her more than once, and always with a hand tight on Tamsin's wrist to make the warning land. It is an eavesdropping you cannot stop. You will hear men's truest hearts whether you wish to or not, and most men's truest hearts are best left unheard. You will hear the ones who lie to their wives and the ones who covet and the ones who would do harm if they dared, and you will have to serve them their bread and say nothing. Say nothing. Ever. Not to them, not to anyone. A woman who hears too much is a woman someone wants silenced. There are men who would drown you in the lake to keep a secret they never even knew they'd told. Keep your face a closed door and your mouth a locked one, and you may live to be old like me. Tamsin had lived 24 years hearing the odd stray thought from farmers' hounds and hunters' hearth wolves. Rain coming, that man is afraid, she is lying, my leg hurts. Where is the boy who used to feed me, most of it small and dull and animal, the low weather of creatures' minds? And she had done exactly as she was told, said nothing, kept her face a closed door. She had grown so good at it that she sometimes forgot she was doing it, the way you forget you are holding your breath until your chest begins to ache. She had never before heard a wolf fall in love. She had certainly never heard one fall in love with her. Look at her hands, he'd said, and Tamsin had looked down at her own 2 hands full of pins and thread and thought, with the cold, clear terror of a woman who has just stepped where the ice is thin. He means me. She got down off the ladder very carefully. She did not run, because running is a thing people notice, and a seamstress who runs from an alpha king's hall is a seamstress with a story following her out the gate. She folded her spare cloth, and she wound her loose thread back onto its card, and she put away her pins one by one with hands that wanted to shake and would not be allowed to. And she walked to the servants' passage with her heart going like a trapped bird, and she resolved to be gone from Havelock before the vows were spoken, coin or no coin, because a seamstress who could hear the king's wolf naming her mate on his own wedding day was a seamstress standing very near a cliff. She got as far as the kitchen door. Then the wolf said, quiet now, almost to himself, in a voice with no jokes left in it, a voice she would come to know as the one he used when he thought no one, not even I, was truly listening. 11 years I've had nothing to say. 11 years. And the one morning I find something worth saying. He's marrying a stranger to bury a war, and I'll have to watch him do it and be glad, because he's a good man and it's the right thing, and I'll never even know her name. And Tamsin, who had done as she was told her whole careful life, who had kept her face a closed door through every stray heart she'd overheard, who had her hand on the doorframe and her feet halfway to the road, stood in my kitchen doorway and found she could not make her feet carry her out. Because she had heard something no one is meant to hear. She had heard a lonely thing be brave. She had heard a creature decide to be glad for a good man's sake even as it grieved for itself, and ask for nothing, and expect nothing, and simply resolve to bear it. And she knew that grief. She had walked 3 days into it and slept in the cold beside it her whole road-worn life, the particular ache of being always at the edge of other people's warm halls and never once inside. And it undid her. It undid her the way a knot comes undone when you finally find the one loose end, all at once and completely, and there is no tying it back. She stayed, God help us both, she stayed. She turned around in the kitchen doorway with the cold road at her back and the warm hall in front of her, and she went to find someone to ask, in a voice she kept very steady, whether the banners wanted any last mending before the feast, because a seamstress with a reason to stay is a seamstress no one questions, and she had just discovered, to her own horror, that she wanted a reason to stay. The vows did not happen at noon, because my wolf sabotaged them, though I did not understand at the time that that was what he was doing. Understand, a wedding to seal a treaty is not a small thing, and it is not a private thing. There were the elders of both holds to be seated by rank, each one certain his rank had been slighted. There were the border lords to be flattered, men who had spent 20 years raiding each other's cattle, and now had to sit at one table and pretend the cattle had wandered off on their own. There was old Alder of Marsh's End, gout-footed and sharp-eyed and half-deaf when it suited him, to be settled where he could see everything and feel important and reach the good wine. Sabine and I were to be joined at the high hearth at noon by both packs' word-keepers, and then there would be a feast, and then Havelock and Marsh's End would be one people, and the graves would stop. My steward had planned it to the minute. My steward planned everything to the minute. It was why the hold ran, and I had time to stand at gravesides. At 1:45 I stood at the high hearth in my gray, and Sabine came in on her father's arm in deep green, the reed green of Marsh's End, cut as severely as my own gray, so that the two of us made a matched and joyless pair, and I remember thinking that at least we had agreed without a word on that much. No pretending, no flowers, no song. She was straight-backed and lovely and about as joyful as a woman walking to sign a ledger, and I felt the old weary peace settle over me. Good, she understands. We'll do this kindly and get on with living, and my wolf, who had gone ominously silent, waited until the word-keeper opened his mouth to begin. Then he said, conversationally, "The seamstress is crying in the pantry." I lost the thread of the ceremony entirely. "She thinks no one saw her stay," he went on. "She meant to leave. I felt her go all the way to the kitchen door and then come back, and now she stood in the cold pantry with the hams and the winter apples, pressing her sleeve to her face so the cook won't see. She's got a heart on her, Emeric. I can feel it from here. It's an ache like a struck thumb. It's the exact ache of a person who has just decided to want something they know they can't have go in. Begin, I said aloud, too loud, and the word keeper flinched and began. And I stood there with my jaw set and my wolf narrating a woman's tears in a pantry while I tried to marry someone else. And I want you to understand that I was furious, in the way you are furious at your own hand for shaking. You could just check on her, he said. It's rude to let a guest cry. She is a hired seamstress, I said, barely moving my lips. She hung the banner that makes our two colors one. That's the whole marriage, right there in thread, gray pine and green reed. Two packs made one, and she's the one who put the stitch in that hides where they join. Least you could do is learn her name. I will not learn her name. The word keeper stopped. My lord. I had said it aloud again. Alder of Marsh's End was looking at me the way you look at a horse that has begun, unaccountably, to limp, a man calculating whether the animal will see out the journey. Sabine was looking at me with the first flicker of something other than resignation, curiosity, maybe, or the beginning of a suspicion that her tired, sensible king might be losing his mind at the altar, which would not do, treaty-wise. The elders of both holds were exchanging the small, careful glances of men storing up a story to tell later. A moment, I said, forgive me the heat. It was not hot. It was a lake hall in early autumn and the fire was banked low and there was frost that morning on the reeds by the water. But a king is allowed a moment, and I took mine, and I walked with what dignity I could gather, which was not much, because a large invisible part of me was straining toward the pantry like a hound on a rope, out the side door and into the passage to breathe. And there, of course, because my wolf has a sense of humor and my life has none, was the seamstress, Tamsin, come out of the pantry with her eyes red-rimmed and her chalk smudge wiped away and her chin up, walking fast, meaning to be gone before the ceremony ended and the servants came flooding back, and she stopped dead when she saw me and I stopped dead when I saw her, and my wolf said in a hush like the inside of a bell, "Oh, oh, there she is. Hello, hello, you. Look at her, Emeric, look at her whole face. The eyes are gray like the lake and she's been crying and she's still holding her chin up like a soldier. I could lie down and die of it." "Forgive me," I said to her, "because a king apologizes to a servant he has startled, that much I knew." "I didn't mean to." "It's nothing, my lord." Her voice was low and steady, but her eyes weren't. Her eyes were doing something complicated, flicking to a point just past my right shoulder and back, as if there were someone standing behind me, someone she was trying very hard not to look at. "I was leaving. I've finished the banners. There's nothing left for me to do here." "Don't let her leave," my wolf said with real panic now, all the jokes gone out of him. "Emeric, Emeric, do not let her walk out that door. I will never forgive you. I have been quiet for 11 years and I am asking you for one thing in 11 years. Stay for the feast," I said. I have no idea why I said it. I heard myself say it the way you hear yourself say something in a dream, from a slight distance, with mild surprise at the sound of your own voice doing a thing you did not sanction. Stay for the feast, to a hired seamstress, on my wedding day. Sabine's people were in that hall. My own elders were in that hall. Old Alder was in that hall with his sharp half-deaf eyes. And I stood in a servant's passage, and invited a woman in a brown dress to my wedding feast, for no reason I could have defended to a single soul in the whole hold. Her eyes flicked past my shoulder again, and something extraordinary crossed her face, a flash of something so close to laughter, so quickly caught and hidden that I nearly missed it, as if she had heard a joke. As if someone standing just behind me had said something that a person could barely keep a straight face through. "That's kind, my lord," she said carefully, "but I don't think the lady would want a seamstress at her table." "She's got you there," my wolf admitted. "The lady," I said, "is marrying me to end a war, not to arrange her table. Stay, eat something. You walked 3 days." Tamsin went very still. Because I had not been told she walked 3 days. No one had told me. She had told no one at Havelock how far she'd come. She'd given her name to the steward's man at the gate and nothing else, because a road woman learns to give her name and nothing else. And here was the king, who had never spoken to her before this passage, saying you walked 3 days as if he knew, as if the knowledge had come to him from somewhere he could not account for. She looked at me with a new and careful fear rising behind her eyes, the old grandmother fear. There are men who would drown you in the lake. And I did not understand it. And my wolf understood it perfectly. Understood in an instant that he had just handed me a fact I had no business knowing. And for once in that whole mad day, my wolf had the grace to go absolutely, guiltily silent. "I'll stay for a little while," Tamsin said at last, very low. "Thank you, my lord." And she went back toward the hall, walking careful and straight, and I stood in the passage with my heart doing something it had not done in 11 years. A slow, hard knock against my ribs, like a fist on a door long painted shut, and I thought, what is happening to me? "Love," said my wolf, recovered now, smug as a cat in cream. "It's called love. You'll get the hang of it. Now go marry the wrong woman, you great fool. I'll wait right here." I went back to marry the wrong woman. Except I didn't, not that day. Because the moment I took my place at the high hearth again, pale, I am told, and visibly unsettled, old Alder of Marsh's End heaved himself up on his gout foot, planted both hands on his cane, and announced to the horror of both word keepers that no daughter of his was marrying a man who fainted twice at his own altar, that a wedding was a bad luck thing rushed, that the king had plainly taken a chill from all this frost and reed damp, and that the ceremony would wait until tomorrow when he had recovered his color and his wits both. In the meantime, he added, settling back down and reaching for the good wine, everyone should stop standing about looking grim and eat. I could have kissed the old man on his gout foot. My wolf actually cheered, a full-throated, delighted whoop that rang through my whole chest and made me have to disguise a flinch as a bow. "I take back everything I ever thought about that old bandit," my wolf said joyfully. "Long live Alder of Marsh's End. Now sit her near the fire, she was cold in that pantry." I did not sit her near the fire, but I thought about it, which, I understand now, was already the beginning of the end of my long gray peace. Here is what I have since learned about that feast, half of it from my own memory and half of it, later, from Tamsin, laughing so hard she had to put her cup down and wipe her eyes and start over 3 times. I spent it losing my mind by inches, and she spent it hearing exactly why. My wolf, freed by the delay and drunk on his own reprieve, became a fountain. There was no stopping him and no turning him off. I would look at Tamsin where she sat at the low end of the tables, small and neat among the Marsh's End servants, keeping to herself, and my wolf would supply a running commentary I could not silence for the life of me. She gave the old dog under the table her bread, he reported, scandalized with tenderness. "Did you see that? The gray deerhound that bites everyone, that's been under Alder's chair growling all evening. She slipped it half her bread and it put its head on her knee like a lamb. She thinks no one saw. I saw. Emmerich, she feeds strange biting dogs. Do you understand what kind of heart a woman has to feed a strange biting dog?" And I would tear my eyes away and make myself talk to Alder about lakeshore grazing rights, about which reed beds fed how many cattle and which wells had been fouled in which raid, the endless arithmetic of the war we were unmaking, and my wolf would say, cutting clean across the arithmetic, "She's cold, look. She keeps tucking her hands up into her sleeves between courses. That's a road habit, you learn it sleeping in barns. You learn to keep your fingers warm because a seamstress with cold, stiff fingers can't earn. She's been cold for years, Emmerich. Give her a warmer seat." Why is the guest of honor's own wolf, the only creature in this whole loud hall, who's noticed the woman is cold? And I would lose the thread of grazing rights entirely, and Alder would peer at me, and I would blame the wine and drink some, to make the lie true. and Tamsin, at the low end of the table, heard all of it. She told me later she nearly disgraced herself 3 times. Once when my wolf, watching me fumble the wine explanation for the second time, said with vast weary disgust, "He's blaming the wine again. He's a grown king ending a 2-generation war, and he's blaming the wine like a boy who broke a jug." I raised him better than this, which was a bald-faced lie. My wolf raised me not at all. My wolf spent my entire youth asleep, and she had to press her napkin hard to her mouth and manufacture a cough, so convincing that the Marsh's end cook beside her thumped her helpfully on the back and offered her water. Once when a border lord, deep in his cups, stood to make a rambling toast to the happy couple, and got halfway through before remembering there was no longer to be a couple that day, and sat down again in confusion, and my wolf observed dryly, "That man has been raiding our cattle for 15 years and he can't finish a toast. This is who we've been at war with. A man who loses his place in his own sentence. What a waste of a decade," and Tamsin had to look very hard at her plate. And once, this was the one she said undid her, when I, trying to be a good and neutral host now that the wedding was postponed, sent a plate of the good honeyed pears down to the low table, for the seamstress who finished the banners so ably. I did it to be fair. I did it because she'd done good work and good work should be marked, and it would have looked strange to single her out and stranger to ignore her, and I told myself it was nothing but a host's courtesy, evenly given. My wolf did not let me have that lie either. He sent her the pears, he said, and his voice had gone soft and wondering, the joke's all fallen away. "Emeric, the honeyed pears, those are your favorite, since you were a boy. You wait all year for the autumn pears, and you ration them like a miser, and you sent her the first plate without even thinking about it. You gave her your favorite thing in the whole world, and you told yourself it was manners. Look at you. You'd give her the whole hold, the lake, the pines, the crown off your head, and stand there afterward insisting it was only good manners." And Tamsin, at the low table, looked down at the plate of honeyed pears the king had sent her, and understood, because she heard him understand it, exactly what she had just been given and exactly why, and she had to hold very, very still, both hands flat on the table, and breathe, because if she had lifted her eyes to mine in that moment she would have laughed and wept at once at the king's own postponed wedding feast, and a laughing, weeping seamstress is a noticed seamstress. And a noticed seamstress with wolf tongue is a seamstress in danger. So she said nothing. She ate one of the pears. She told me much later that it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted, and that she has never been able to eat one since without her eyes stinging. She let my wolf narrate my hopeless, unwitting heart into her ear for 3 hours, and she kept her face a closed door. But the door, she said, had begun to have a crack of light under it. Because a woman can only hear so much tenderness meant for her, delivered by a creature who does not know she can hear it and therefore has no reason to flatter or lie, before it stops being funny and starts being the truest thing that has ever happened to her. Late in the feast, when the elders were deep in their cups and the border lords were singing something loud and tuneless about a girl and a boat, Sabine of Marsh's End rose from her place, crossed the dais, and sat down in the empty chair beside me. She did it with purpose. Sabine did everything with purpose. She was not a woman who drifted anywhere. "You've been strange all day," she said without preamble, pitching her voice under the singing so only I could hear. "And I want to understand it before I stand at a hearth with you tomorrow. You are not by every account a strange man. I've made inquiries, I make inquiries about anyone I might marry, it seemed only sensible. Everyone says the same thing. Dutiful, sober, fair to a fault. Dull as a good fence, one of your own elders told me, and he meant it as praise." She turned her clear gray eyes on me, level and unafraid. And this dull, sober, dutiful man went white at our altar, called for a moment twice, said I will not learn her name to no one anyone could see, and has spent his entire postponed wedding feast looking at a seamstress at the low table like she's a fire and he's a man who's been cold for years. She let that sit. "So, I'd like to know what I'm marrying into, my lord, before I marry into it. Are you well? Is there something I ought to be told?" I opened my mouth to reassure her. To say the heat, the chill, the strain of the treaty, forgive me, it is nothing. Tell her the truth, my wolf said quietly. All the mischief gone. You don't know all of it yet, but tell her the part you do know. She's being honest with you. Be honest back. She's earned it. I did not tell her the truth exactly, because I did not know the truth well enough to tell it. I did not yet understand about Tamsin's ear, about the wolf tongue, about the whole mad shape of what was happening. But I hesitated. I hesitated a moment too long, and Sabine was a sharp woman, sharper than any of us that day, and my hesitation told her more than a speech would have. Ah, she said. And then I will never forget this. It changed the whole course of both our lives. The straight diplomatic back eased, just slightly, the careful mouth softened, and something moved across her face that I could only call relief. Enormous, unlooked-for relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying a stone up a hill and just been told they may set it down. Well, she said quietly, that is a mercy. A mercy. She glanced around the hall at her father roaring with laughter at something an elder had said, at the singing border lords, at the two colors twined on the banners overhead, and she lowered her voice further still, until I had to lean in to catch it. May I be honest with you, King Emeric, as one tired person to another, more honest than either of us has been all this while. She did not wait for permission. I did not want this marriage either. I agreed to it for the same reason you did, for the boys who'd stopped dying, for the widows who'd stopped being made. I would have married you tomorrow and been a good and loyal Luna to Havelock and never once complained, not to you, not to my father, not to my own heart in the dark. I'd have done it with what looked like a whole heart, because it was the right thing, and I am not a woman who does the right thing by halves. She looked down at her hands, folded on the table, and for the first time all day she looked young. But there is a man at Marsh's End, a plain man, my father's houndsman, if you can believe it, Corin, his name is, no title, no lands, nothing my father would ever in his life bless. He mends the kennels and breeds the deerhounds and has hands scarred from 100 years of thorns and teeth. And I have loved him for 6 years, and told not one living soul, because a lord's daughter does not marry a houndsman when there is a war to end and a treaty to sign, and a whole people depending on her being sensible. She raised her eyes to mine again, steady, and I saw the courage it cost her to say the next part. I tell you this only because I saw your face at that altar, and I thought perhaps we are two people caught in the exact same trap, doing the exact same brave, stupid, sensible thing, each of us burying a heart to save a border. And I thought perhaps, my lord, if there were only some other way to make this peace hold, then neither of us would have to spend the rest of our lives being sensible at a stranger. Perhaps I am wrong. Tell me if I am wrong, and I will marry you tomorrow and never speak of it again. But I did not think I could stand at that hearth without asking you once whether there might be a door. I sat there stunned. The singing went on, the fire ticked, and behind my ribs my wolf said, warm as a hearth, oh, I like her enormously. She has a houndsman named Corin with scarred hands. Everyone in the world should have a houndsman named Corin. Emeric, listen to me now. Forget everything I've been saying about the seamstress for one moment and listen. She is handing you the door. She is handing you the door with both hands. Take it. There may be another way, I heard myself say slowly, feeling my way along the thought like a man in a dark room who has just touched a wall where he expected empty air. A treaty needn't be a marriage. It never truly needed to be a marriage. That was our father's idea of how peace is made. The old idea, blood joined to blood so that neither side can strike without striking its own children. But that is not the only way to bind two holds, and it may not even be the best. We could join Havelock and Marsh's End with 100 threads instead of one rope, shared grazing on the disputed shore, held in common and worked in common, so that neither of us profits from the other's loss. A joint council of both holds elders, meeting turnabout at each hall, so that a grievance is heard before it becomes a raid. My sister's son fostered at Marsh's End, and one of your young kin fostered here at Havelock, so that in a generation there is no family on either side that does not have a child it loves under the other's roof. I looked at her. A rope can be cut with one stroke, Lady Sabine. 100 threads must be cut one at a time, and long before you finish, someone has come to their senses. Our people would be more truly one that way than they ever would be by watching the two of us stand joyless at a hearth. I paused. And you could marry your houndsman, and I stopped. I did not finish the sentence. I did not yet know how to finish it. Sabine of Marsh's End, who did everything with purpose, who had not by any account wept in public since she was a child, put her face in her hands for a long moment. When she took them away, her eyes were bright, and her careful mouth was not careful at all. "My father," she said when she could speak, "will be difficult about the houndsman." "Your father," I said, "has been looking for an excuse to stop paying for a wedding since the moment he arrived. He postponed it himself an hour ago for the joy of not paying the musicians. Bring him a treaty that costs him no dowry and saves him a feast, and he will discover a deep and lifelong love of peace by counsel before you finish reading it aloud. Leave your father to me." She laughed, a real laugh startled out of her, the first I had heard from her in the 2 times we'd ever met, and then quieter with a searching look. "And you, my lord, a counsel and a fostering saves my heart. What saves yours? You did not go white at that altar for the sake of grazing rights." I did not answer. I could not. But across the hall, at the low end of the table, a seamstress who could hear my wolf's every crowing, wondering, hopeful thought sat with a plate of honeyed pears going cold in front of her, and a strange dog's head heavy on her knee. Listening to the king, she had meant to run from that very morning, unpick his own loveless marriage thread by thread, dissolving the whole edifice of it not out of selfishness, but out of a fairness so complete it freed everyone at the table, herself included. And she felt the crack of light under her long-closed door widen and widen into something she could no longer, by any road woman's discipline, pretend was small. "He doesn't even know I heard," she thought, watching me. "He's doing all of it and he doesn't know I heard a word." And that, she told me later, was the moment, not the pears, not the banner, not even the lonely brave voice at the kitchen door, but that the moment she stopped being a seamstress passing through, and started, without any right to it and against every warning her grandmother ever gave her, to hope. It should have been simple after that. It was not simple, because nothing that involves my wolf is ever simple, and because I still did not know the one thing that would have made all of the rest of it make plain sense, that the seamstress heard him. The wedding was called off for the king's health, which fooled no one and satisfied everyone, and became, in the telling and retelling around both holds, the wedding where the Alpha King took a chill, and the old Lord of Marsh's End saved the day with his good sense, which suited all of us, being a story with no losers in it. Alder of Marsh's End presented privately the next morning with a treaty that cost him not 1 coin of dowry, and saved him the whole ruinous expense of a royal feast, discovered, exactly as I had promised Sabine he would, a great and sudden statesman-like love of peace by counsel. He haggled for 2 hours over the grazing shares, purely for the pleasure of it, and signed before noon, and spent the rest of the day telling anyone who would listen that a wedding was always a young fool's way to end a war, and that a council was the wise old way, and that he'd said so all along. Sabine wrote 3 letters to her houndsman Corin in a single night, and burned 2 of them for saying too much too fast, and sent the 3rd, and rode home to Marsh's End with a treaty in her saddlebag, and, for the first time in 6 years, a future she had actually chosen. And the holds began, cautiously, wonderingly, to become one people the slow way, the true way, thread by thread, a joint grazing on the disputed shore before the first snow, a shared council seated before the year turned, 2 children of 2 houses packed off with their nurses to be fostered under the other's roof, and to grow up, in time, unable to remember that their families had ever been enemies at all. And I, the sober, dutiful, dull as a good fence king of Havelock, invented reasons to keep the seamstress at my hold. I am not proud of the reasons. They were transparent to everyone but me. The banners needed mending, they did not. She had done them perfectly, I had inspected them myself and could find no fault and invented one anyway, a loose thread that did not exist. The hall's old tapestries were fraying, they were, but they had been fraying gently for 30 years, and I had walked past them 30 years without a flicker of concern, and now suddenly the honor of Havelock could not survive another week of their neglect. The kitchens wanted new aprons, the guard wanted their worn cloak linings replaced. Some ancient banner in some forgotten storeroom might, conceivably, one day require attention. And then, when I had run through every honest excuse and several dishonest ones, I reached for the one I could not say aloud without my voice going strange in my own throat. My mother's wedding cloak. It was real, at least that one. My mother had died when I was 15, the year before my father, so that I lost them both inside 2 winters and got the crown fresh from a double grief. And her wedding cloak had been packed away in cedar since, deep gray Havelock wool worked all over with silver thread in a pattern of pine boughs, a thing of real beauty and real ruin, the silver tarnished black in places, and the wool gone thin at the shoulders where she had worn it. No one had touched it in 15 years because no one had dared. It was the one commission in the whole hold I could not name aloud without something happening to my face, and so, of course, it was the one my wolf seized on with both jaws and would not let go. The cloak, he breathed, when I had stammered out the commission in the East Solar, and Tamsin had gone very quiet and bowed her head and said, in a low voice, that she would be honored to try. Emmerich, do you understand what you just did? You gave her your mother's cloak. The one thing in this hold you love that isn't the hold itself. You put your dead mother's wedding cloak in that woman's hands and asked her to make it whole again. That's not a commission. Nobody in the history of the world has ever given anybody a commission like that. That's a courtship. You're courting her with your mother's grave goods and you don't even know you're doing it. You magnificent, oblivious idiot. I have never in 11 years been so proud of you, and I want to weep. I am not courting her, I told the empty corridor after she had gone in to begin. You gave her the pears and the cloak. The pears were manners. The cloak is restoration work. She is the finest hand with a needle I have ever seen, and my mother's cloak deserves the finest hand. That is all. Nobody's manners are that good, my wolf said, and you know it, and went off humming to himself insufferably for the rest of the day. And so it went, for the better part of a month. Autumn deepened over the lake. The reeds went gold and then brown, the pines held their green, the mornings came in with frost, and the evenings closed early and blue. Tamsin sat in the small East Solar, the warmest room in the hold, south-facing, where the low autumn sun came in all afternoon, with my mother's cloak spread across her knees and her needle going, unpicking 15 years of tarnished stitch by patient stitch, and laying in new silver bright as water. And I found, with a regularity that fooled absolutely no one on my entire staff, a regularity that had my steward and my chamberlain and my old nurse all exchanging looks behind my back, that I had urgent business in the East Wing several times a day. I would come in on some invented errand, a question about the guard's cloak linings, a query about whether the thread stocks would last the winter. Once, memorably, nothing at all, no errand, just my own 2 feet having carried me there while my mind was elsewhere. And she would set down her work and rise, and I would tell her to sit, please, don't get up, don't let me interrupt, and then I would stand there in the doorway like a post, like a boy, like a man who has forgotten every word he ever knew. While my wolf narrated everything, I was too proud or too frightened or too long-walled up to say. Tell her the light suits her, he would say. It does. Look, it's coming in gold across the whole room and catching in her hair, and she doesn't know it. She's bent over the silver work, and she has no idea she's the prettiest thing in the room by a mile. Tell her. I would say, the restoration goes well. Coward, my wolf would say, without heat, almost fondly. Tell her you look forward to the East Wing now. Tell her you've started taking the long way round the whole hold, past the buttery and the cold north passage, just to come by this door and see if she's here. Tell her that yesterday you kept the entire border council waiting a quarter hour because you could hear her humming through the door and you wanted to know how the tune ended. I would say, you've a good hand with the silver thread. My mother would have been glad of it. And Tamsin would answer something quiet and correct and gentle about the silver thread, or about my mother's fine work in the original, or about how the pine bough pattern was laid, and her eyes would flick just once, to that point past my right shoulder where my wolf lived. I had begun to notice that flick now, though I did not understand it. I thought perhaps she was shy of my gaze and looked past me to compose herself. And the corner of her mouth would do the small hidden thing it did, the almost laugh, the caught light, and I would leave the solar more thoroughly undone than I had entered it, and stand in the cold corridor with my heart doing its slow hard knock, and think, she is laughing at me, kindly. But she sees straight through me, and she is far too gentle to say so, and I am making a fool of myself in my own hold, and I cannot seem to stop, and God help me, I do not want to stop. I was half right. She did see through me. She saw through me completely, all the way to the bottom, more completely than any person had ever seen through me in my life. But she wasn't laughing at me. She was laughing at him, at my wolf. At the running, hopeless, adoring, filterless commentary that I believed I alone in all the world could hear, and that she heard every single word of, every single day, in that quiet gold-lit solar with my dead mother's cloak spread across her knees, the great alpha king of Havelock standing in a doorway saying, "You've a good hand with the silver thread," while his wolf, 6 inches behind his own shoulder and entirely unaware of its audience, howled, "Tell her you love her. Tell her, you fool. Tell her before the snow. Tell her," into an ear the king did not know was listening. She told me, much later, that some afternoons it took everything she had, every year of her grandmother's hard discipline, every mile of road that had taught her to keep her face a closed door, not to set down the needle and laugh until she cried. That there was one particular afternoon when I stood in the doorway for a full minute in complete silence, having entirely forgotten the errand that brought me, while my wolf recited, in the tone of a bard composing an epic, a catalogue of everything he admired about the way she held her needle. And I said, finally, the only thing I could dredge up, "It's colder today," and turned and left. And she had to put her face down into my mother's cloak and shake silently for a good while before she could see the stitches again. She should have run weeks before. She knew she should. Every single morning her grandmother's voice woke with her, "Say nothing, ever. A woman who hears too much is a woman someone wants silenced. There are men who would drown you in the lake," and every single morning she picked up her needle and stayed, because, she told me, not laughing at all by then, her hand in mine, because a person can grow so used to a voice that misses them before they've even left the room. Because my wolf, in loving me at her, day after day, with no reason on earth to flatter and no knowledge that he was heard, had somehow made her feel, for the first time in a whole life of barns and back kitchens and other people's overheard hearts, that she was worth the loving, not useful, not tolerated, not paid and sent on, worth it, the treasure in the room instead of the eavesdropper at the edge of it. And she could not make herself walk away from the only place in 24 years of road she had ever been the treasure. So we went on, the three of us, in our strange, unbalanced dance. He talked. She heard. And I stood in the middle of the two of them like a fool holding a candle, lighting the whole scene bright as noon and blind, stone blind to every shadow it threw. It could not last, of course. Such a thing never can. A secret held by three, where one of the three does not know he is keeping it, is a jug already cracked. It is only a question of which small, ordinary thing, on which ordinary day, will be the one to knock it off the shelf. It broke, in the end, over a spark from the fire, on a raining afternoon at the very end of the month, when my mother's cloak was nearly done. It was raining. The kind of steady gray lake crane that comes down straight and quiet and closes the whole world into the size of one warm room. My mother's cloak was nearly finished. A day's work left. No more. The silver ran bright as new water now all through the pine boughs, and the thin-worn shoulders were re-backed and strong, and it lay across Tamsin's knees looking as it must have looked the day my mother wore it, 30 years gone. I had come to the solar that afternoon with no errand at all, not even an invented one. I had given up, somewhere in that long month, even the pretense of a reason. I had simply come and sat down in the other chair by the fire in the gray rain light without a word of explanation, and Tamsin had glanced up and said nothing and let me, and we had passed a long, quiet, wordless while together, her needle going, the fire ticking and settling, the rain running down the streaming glass and the lake lost behind it, and it was, I understood even as it was happening, the most peaceful hour I had known in 11 years, since before the crown, since before the double grief. Just the two of us, and the rain, and the small sure pull of the needle through the cloth. My wolf was quiet too, content. Not narrating for once, not scheming, just present watching her hands with me, the two of us, easy in it. All three of us at rest in the same warm room at the same moment for the first and only time before everything changed. Then a log settled in the fire with a soft collapse and threw a spark out onto the hearthstone, and one small ember arced up and landed on the edge of the cloak's re-backed hem. Tamsin brushed it away quick, before it could catch, rode quick. A woman who has slept by 100 fires and knows exactly how fast wool can char, and then pressed her whole palm flat over the spot, holding it a moment, feeling through her hand to be sure no ember had lodged in the weave to smolder. And my wolf, watching her palm spread flat and careful over my mother's cloak, watching those road-worn, needle-scarred, gentle hands guard the one thing I loved as if it were her own, said soft and helpless and entirely to himself, in the exact hushed voice he had used that very first morning on the ladder, with no thought of being heard by anyone. Those hands, God, those hands. I would give anything, anything at all, the pack, the lake, the years I've got left to be a man who could just reach across and take those hands. And Tamsin, tired, warm, off her guard for the first time in a month, lulled by the rain and the peace and the near-finished work, a full month past the point where the door between us had any lock left on it at all, answered him. "You could just ask," she said, absently, softly, not lifting her eyes from the hem, to the cloak, to the hands, to the wolf. Then she went white. Because I had not spoken. My mouth had not moved. I was sitting 3 feet away in perfect silence watching the rain, and there was no reason on this whole earth for a seamstress to answer a thing that had been said only inside her king's own skull, unless. The needle stopped, the fire ticked, the rain ran down the glass, and I sat very, very still and felt the whole month rearrange itself behind me all at once, like a long hall of doors I had walked past 100 times all swinging open together in a single gust. The flick of her eyes passed my right shoulder every single time to the exact spot where he lived. The hidden almost laugh in the doorway at the feast over the pears that came always a half-beat after he'd said something, never after I had. The way she had known that first day in the passage that she'd walked 3 days, when no one had told me because he had told me and she had heard him tell me. The way every joke he made landed on her face like sun. A whole month of a woman laughing softly at a wit I could not account for, and me thinking, all that time, that she was laughing gently at a fool in a doorway. She had not been laughing at the fool in the doorway. "You hear him," I said. It was not a question. My voice had gone to almost nothing, worn down to a thread. Tamsin sat frozen with my mother's finished cloak across her knees, and her needle stopped in the air, and her grandmother's whole terrified life pressing down on her all at once. Say nothing, ever. A woman who hears too much is a woman someone wants silenced. There are men who would drown you in the lake to keep a secret they never even knew they'd told. And I watched her, across 3 feet of rain-gray air, decide in real and visible time whether to lie to me. whether to laugh it off or claim she'd been talking to herself, or her needle, or the fire. Whether to be, one more time, the road woman with the closed-door face who kept herself safe by keeping herself silent. Oh no, my wolf whispered, appalled, the whole month crashing down on him too. Oh, Emeric, oh no, she's heard. She's heard everything. Every word I've said since the ladder. All of it, the pears, the light, the long way round, the humming. Every single time I told you to tell her. She was standing right there hearing me tell you to tell her. Oh, what have I? And then even my wolf, who had not stopped talking in a month, ran entirely out of words, which I would not, an hour before, have believed was a thing that could happen. Since the ladder, Tamsin said. Her voice shook, but she said it. She lifted her chin, that small, brave soldier's straightening I had first seen in the passage on my wedding day. The truest thing about her. The thing that had undone my wolf before either of us knew her name. And she looked me full in the eye across the rain-gray room and told me the whole truth, even though she plainly believed in that moment that it might cost her everything she had, which was little enough to begin with. Since the first morning, on the ladder, your wolf said there, that one, and I looked down thinking a person had spoken, and not one soul else in that whole crowded hall so much as blinked, and I understood I was the only one in the room who could hear him. It's a thing in my blood, my lord. My grandmother called it the wolf tongue. One woman in a family, if that, the ear that catches what a bonded wolf says underneath the words its man says out loud. My great-grandmother had it. Then no one. Then me. She swallowed hard, and the needle trembled in her hand, and she set it down at last on the arm of the chair with great care, as if she needed both hands empty to say the rest. I've heard him every day. In the passage that first morning. All through the feast, the dog, the pears, all of it. Here every afternoon, every time you came to the door. I've heard, her voice cracked clean across, and she gathered it and went on. I've heard everything he said, everything you felt and not said. And I stayed anyway, which was wrong of me, wrong and greedy, and I knew it. And my grandmother would weep to know it. And I'll go tonight, in the rain if I have to. And I swear to you on her grave that I will never breathe a word of any of it to a living soul as long as I. Everything, I said. I could barely draw breath around it. My whole hopeless, wordless, walled-up month was lying open on the floor between us. Every tell her I had been too frightened to obey. Every unsaid thing my wolf had said in my stead, the whole shape of my undoing laid bare, and she had heard all of it. The pears and the cloak and the long way round past the cold north passage and the council I had kept waiting a quarter hour to hear the end of a tune. She knew. She had known for a month, in perfect and merciless detail, exactly how completely I had come undone over her. While I stood in her doorway saying, "You've a good hand with the silver thread and it's colder today," and believed myself a mystery. I should have been mortified. Some small proud corner of me was mortified, and always will be a little when I remember it's colder today. But the larger part of me, the part my wolf had spent a whole month hurling himself against, banging and banging on the door of my dutiful, walled-up, 11-year silent heart until his voice went hoarse with it. The larger part of me felt something give way in my chest, all at once and completely, like a window in a shut room thrown suddenly wide to the weather, and it was not shame at all. It was relief, vast, undignified, staggering relief, because the single most frightening thing in the whole world about loving her had been the saying of it, the terror of standing before this woman and putting the great helpless want of my heart into my own plain voice and watching her face while she decided what to do with it. And now I would never have to, because she already knew. She had known everything for a month. She had heard my wolf beg, "Tell her you love her, tell her before the snow, day after day, in that gold-lit room," and she had not run. She had stayed. She had brushed an ember off my mother's cloak with her bare hand and stayed. I stood up. My mother's finished cloak slid from her knees as she started up too, and I caught it without looking, caught it the way you catch a thing that has always, somehow, belonged to you. And I laid it gently over the back of her chair, And I did the one single thing in that whole long month that my wolf had not had to ask me to do. I crossed the 3 feet of rain-gray floor, and I knelt down in front of the seamstress, and I took her hands. "Oh," said my wolf very, very quietly, all the noise of a month gone out of him into one small syllable. "Oh, at last, look at that. He did it himself. He did it all on his own." "Tamsin," I said her name, the name I had refused for a month to learn aloud and had known perfectly well in my own heart for 3 weeks, the name I had turned over in the dark like a stone worn smooth. "You will not go tonight. Not tonight, and not in the rain, and not ever, unless it is you who wishes to go, and then I will send you with an escort and a purse and my whole heart, but you will not go tonight because you are frightened of what you heard. Do you understand me? You have nothing to fear here, nothing." "My lord, he has been telling you I love you for a month," I said, and my voice went rough and I let it, because I was too much of a coward to say it in my own. So let me say it now in my own voice, so there is no mistaking whose voice it is and no wolf to blame it on. My hands closed warm around hers over the needle scars and the road callus, and I felt how they had gone still and stopped their trembling. "I love you, not because he does though he does. He has loved you since the latter and been perfectly insufferable about it, and I will hear about it for the rest of my life, but because I do. I, Emeric, the sober dull fence of a king, love you. I have taken the long way round my own hold for a month to pass one door. I kept a border council waiting to hear a woman hum. I put my mother's wedding cloak in your hands and called it a commission because I had not the courage to call it what it was, which was the truest gift I have ever given anyone in my life." I drew a breath. "You have heard my truest heart for a month. Whether you wish to or not, the very thing your grandmother warned you was a curse, the thing you have spent your life keeping yourself safe from. I am asking you to let it be, just this once, the opposite of a curse. Let it be the one heart in all the world that you never, ever have to wonder about, because whatever I say aloud, however clumsy, however cold, you can always, always hear that underneath it, it is true." Tamsin was crying now, openly, the tears running down without her lifting a hand to stop them. But she was also, at long, long last, laughing. The hidden almost laugh of a whole month finally let all the way out into the open, bright and wet and disbelieving and free. "He's saying something," she said, hiccuping through it, half a laugh and half a sob. "Right now, your wolf, he's. I know he is. I can feel him being unbearably smug behind my own ribs. What is he saying?" She tipped her head and listened, that small listening tilt I would come to know better than my own heartbeat over the years to follow, and her whole face changed as she heard him. It softened and wondered, and went so tender that it undid the last dutiful, grief-cold stone in the whole long wall of me. The last stone I had not even known was still standing. "He says," she reported, her voice breaking and mending on it, "tell him yes. Tell him yes, you daft, lovely, brave woman, before he talks himself out of it or apologizes or tries to give you an escort and a purse. I have waited 11 years, for that man to want one single thing in this world for his own self and not for the hold or the treaty or the dead, and I will not, have the two of you ruin it now with good manners." She laughed, and the tears came harder, and she turned her hands in mine so that she was holding me as much as I held her, gripping tight, and I felt the grip of it not in my hands but deep in my chest, where he lived. So that for the first time in 11 years, my wolf and I wanted the exact same thing at the exact same moment, with no war and no duty, and no ledger of the dead, and no gray wall standing anywhere between the two of us and it. "Yes," she said to me, to him, to the rain and the cloak and the whole mad, tender, impossible month. "Of course, yes, yes." We did not have a great wedding in the end. We had already spent Havelock's whole patience, and Marsh's ends too, on the one we didn't hold. Sabine of Marsh's End married her houndsman Corin on the first clear day of the following spring, in her father's orchard, under the apple trees just coming into blossom. Old Alder gave her away, grumbling the whole length of the aisle about houndsmen and hound money and what the world was coming to, and then wept, hard and helplessly, the very moment he thought no one was looking, into a handkerchief the size of a small banner, and pretended for the rest of his life that it had been the blossom pollen in his eyes. Corin's scarred hands shook so badly he could hardly manage the ring, and Sabine steadied them with her own, the way she steadied everything, and they were, by every account that reached me, ferociously happy for the whole of their long lives together. The treaty between our two holds held on its 100 threads and never once needed the single rope. It holds still. There are children grown now on that shared shore who cannot be made to believe that Havelock and Marsh's End were ever anything but one people, and who laugh when the old men try to tell them about the war, the way the young always laugh at the griefs of the old, which is, when you think on it, exactly the victory we were after. Sabine came to my own wedding, a small one, held not in the great hall with its banners but in the little east solar where I had fallen in love without once noticing I was doing it, with my mother's finished cloak, silver bright and whole, wrapped around Tamsin's shoulders because it was hers now and always had been, from the first stitch. Sabine kissed Tamsin's cheek and looked her over with those clear gray diplomat's eyes and said, "I knew it was the seamstress. I said as much at the feast. I told him he looked at you like a cold man at a fire, and he had the gall to say nothing." And Tamsin said, "You have no idea," and the two of them laughed together at a joke that only 3 of us in the whole room could fully hear, for my wolf, of course, was narrating the entire wedding into my Luna's ear from start to finish, and could not be made to stop, and would not have stopped for the world. "She's beautiful," he wept happily, all through my own vows, so that I had to say them with a catch in my voice that everyone kindly mistook for feeling, and were not wrong to. "Look at her, look at you, Emeric, standing up straight in the good gray with your mother's silver on her shoulders, my whole life's work. The pair of you. 11 years of silence, and this is what I was saving my voice for. I could lie down and die of it, and I never would. I want to see every day of this." And beside me my new Luna, my seamstress queen, stood trying to say her own vows with a straight face while a wolf wept joy into her ear. And twice she had to stop and press her lips together and gather herself, and every soul in that small, warm room thought the road-worn seamstress queen was simply overcome with the wonder of it all. And she was, but not as ever for the reason they thought. That is the strange gift at the center of my whole life now, the thing I could not have begun to understand that first mad frost-bright morning and understand completely, gratefully, every ordinary day since. I will never have to wonder whether she knows my heart. Most men spend a whole marriage translating themselves, saying no. What I meant was, saying that came out wrong, saying I'm not angry at you, I'm only tired, forever trying to build a bridge across the small, unbridgeable gap that lies between any one person and any other. Tamsin hears me underneath my own words. When I am short at the council table over some tangle of grazing shares and come home gruff and clipped and say it's nothing, leave it, she hears my wolf mutter behind it, "He's tired to the bone, and he missed you all afternoon, and he'll never say so first." And she pours the wine and does not press me, and lets me come round in my own time. And I am known, all the way down to the floor of myself, by someone who chose to stay in the room after hearing every single thing that lives there. She still travels the lake road some seasons with her needle and her good eye, because a Luna of Havelock may go where she pleases, and it pleases her, now and then, to go where she once had to. But she is not mending for her bread any more. She is mending because she loves the road and the work and the small kind holds along the water, and because, she says, a person should not forget the shape of the life that made them. And she always comes home, and on the nights she is away my wolf paces and frets behind my ribs and cannot settle, and I let him, because I pace and fret too, and there is no shame in it between us any more, no wall left standing anywhere between the wanting and the man who wants. Last night she came in late off the early spring road, cloak damp and wind bright and smiling, and she stopped in the doorway of the East Solar. The same solar, the same low gold light, the same fire ticking in the same hearth where an ember once landed on my mother's cloak and cracked my whole shut life open. And before I could rise to go to her, she held up one hand to stop me and tipped her head and listened. Listened to the thing I had said the moment I saw her without knowing I had said anything at all. "He says," she told me, crossing the room to me at last, taking my two hands in her two scarred and gentle ones exactly as she had that first true rain-gray afternoon. "There, that one right there." She was laughing softly and her eyes were bright. "Same as the latter. Word for word. 11 years of silence and then 8 years of me, and he has not changed his mind once, not one single time, not for one single day." "No," I said, and drew her in out of the cold spring dark, into the gold and the warmth and the whole life we had made out of a wedding that never happened. "Neither have I." And somewhere behind my ribs, where a silent thing had waited 11 long gray years to find one single thing worth breaking its silence for, my wolf gave a low, delighted, disbelieving huff. The sound of someone who has found a coin in the lining of an old, old coat, and knows now that it was there the whole time, only waiting. And this time, at last, all three of us were glad of it together.